11-year-old Sarah sat quietly in row 8, just another kid the adults ignored. But when the engine failed and the pilot collapsed, she grabbed the radio microphone. "This is Sarah Chen. I'm 11 years old. The pilot is unconscious and I need help landing this plane." Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also, like and subscribe for more stories. The morning. Sun was bright and warm when Sarah Chen walked across the small airport with her pink backpack. She was 11 years old but looked younger. Her black hair was tied in a neat ponytail, and she wore blue jeans with white sneakers. Other people at Cedar Valley Airport smiled at her. The way adults always smile at children traveling alone, Sarah climbed the small steps into the white and blue Cessna. Han 72. The plane was tiny, compared to the big jets she had seen in movies. It had only 8 seats in 4 rows. She found her seat in row 8, the very back of the plane. She put her backpack under the seat in front of her and buckled her seatbelt. Captain Mike Torres was the pilot. He was about 45 years old with gray hair and kind brown eyes. He wore a white shirt with gold stripes on the shoulders. When he saw Sarah, he smiled and walked back to her row. "Hello there, sweetheart," Captain Torres said in a friendly voice. "What's your name?" "Sarah Chen," she answered politely. "Well, Sarah, this is going to be a great flight today. Have you ever been on a small plane before?" He offered her a small bag of peanuts from his pocket. Sarah shook her head. "No, sir. This is my first time. Don't worry about anything. I've been flying for 20 years and I'll take good care of you." "Are you visiting family in Denver?" "Yes, sir. My grandmother lives there." Sarah didn't tell him about her father. She didn't mention that her father had been a pilot too, or that he had died in a plane crash 2 years ago when she was 9. She also didn't say anything about all the hours she spent every night studying aviation on her tablet. Captain Torres patted her shoulder gently. "Well, you just sit back and enjoy the ride. If you need anything, just let me know. We should be in Denver in about 2 hours." As Captain Torres walked back to the cockpit, other passengers got on the plane. Mrs. Johnson was an older lady with white hair and a purple sweater. She sat in row 6, 2 seats in front of Sarah. When she saw Sarah sitting alone, she turned around with a concerned look. "Are you traveling by yourself, dear?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "How old are you?" "I'm 11. My mom put me on the plane and my grandmother will pick me up in Denver." "Oh my goodness, you're so young to be flying alone. But don't worry, we'll all look after you." Mrs. Johnson opened her purse and pulled out some candy. "Would you like a mint? Flying sometimes makes your ears pop." Sarah took the candy and said thank you. She knew Mrs. Johnson was being kind, but adults always treated her like she didn't know anything. They thought 11-year-old kids only cared about toys and cartoons. Mr. Peterson got on next. He was a businessman in a dark blue suit carrying a briefcase. He sat in row 4 and looked back at Sarah with a friendly smile. "Hey there, kiddo. First flight?" When Sarah nodded, he continued, "Well, you picked a beautiful day for it. Wait until you see the mountains from up here. It's like looking at a postcard." The last 2 passengers were a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Davis. They sat in rows 2 and 3 and were excited about their vacation in Colorado. They waved at Sarah and asked if she was excited about her trip. Everyone was being nice to Sarah, but they all saw her the same way. They saw a small, quiet child who needed to be watched and protected. They thought she was probably nervous about flying and would need help if anything went wrong. None of them knew the truth about Sarah. The truth was that Sarah had been secretly studying airplanes and flying for 2 whole years. After her father died in a plane crash, she had found all his old books about aviation in the garage. Her mother had wanted to throw them away, but Sarah asked to keep them in her room. Her mother thought she just wanted something to remember her father by. But Sarah did more than just keep the books. She read every single page, even the parts that were very technical and hard to understand. She looked up words she didn't know on the internet. She watched YouTube videos about flying. She joined online forums where pilots talked about airplanes and emergency procedures. Sarah's favorite thing to do was play flight simulator games on her tablet. But these weren't simple games like other kids played. These were realistic programs that taught real flying skills. She had learned how to start engines, read instruments, talk on the radio, and handle emergencies. She practiced for hours every night after her homework was done. Her mother thought she was just playing games or watching videos for kids. Sarah never corrected her. Adults always thought kids couldn't understand complicated things like flying airplanes. They would have told her the flight simulators were too advanced for someone her age, But Sarah's father had been different. Before he died, he had started teaching her about airplanes. He showed her how to read the basic instruments and explained how planes stayed in the air. He told her that flying was both an art and a science, and that anyone could learn if they studied hard enough. "Knowledge doesn't care how old you are, Sarah," he used to say. "If you learn the right things and practice enough, you can do anything." Sarah missed her father every day, but his words helped her keep studying. She wanted to understand the world that he had loved so much, even though it was the same world that had taken him away from her. Now, sitting in row 8 of the Cessna, Sarah listened to the sounds around her. She heard Captain Torres in the cockpit, talking to the control tower on his radio. She heard the click of switches and the hum of electrical systems. Most passengers would think these were just random airplane noises, but Sarah understood what each sound meant. The engines started with a cough and then settled into a smooth rumble. Sarah knew from her studies that this was a Lycoming 0320 engine, which produced 150 horsepower. She could tell from the sound that it was running normally, with all 4 cylinders firing properly. Captain Torres's voice came over the intercom system. "Good morning, everyone. This is your captain speaking. We're going to be taxiing out to the runway in just a moment. It's a beautiful day for flying, with clear skies and light winds. Our flight time to Denver will be about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are in the upright position." The plane began to move, rolling slowly across the concrete taxiway toward the runway. Sarah looked out her small window and watched the ground crew working around other airplanes. She saw fuel trucks, baggage carts, and people in orange vests directing traffic. Mrs. Johnson turned around again. "Are you doing okay back there, sweetie? Some children get scared during takeoff." "I'm fine, thank you," Sarah said. She wasn't scared at all. She was excited. This was her first time in a real airplane, and she wanted to experience everything. The plane stopped at the end of the runway while Captain Torres did his final checks. Sarah could hear him talking to the control tower. "Cedar Valley Tower, Cessna 478, Charlie ready for takeoff. Runway 23, Cessna 478, Charlie, you are cleared for takeoff. Runway 23, wind 240 at 5 knots. The engine noise got louder as Captain Torres pushed the throttle forward. The plane started rolling down the runway, picking up speed. Sarah felt herself pushed back into her seat as they accelerated. The rumble of the wheels on the concrete got faster and faster. Then suddenly they were flying. The nose of the plane tilted up and Sarah watched the ground fall away below them. The houses and cars got smaller and smaller. The sensation was amazing, even better than her flight simulator. "Wow," said Mr. Davis from row 3. "Look at that view." Sarah pressed her face to the window and watched the landscape spread out below them. She could see farms, roads, and rivers arranged in neat patterns. The mountains were far ahead, purple and blue in the distance. Captain Torres leveled the plane off at 8,500 feet. The engine settled into a comfortable cruise power setting. Sarah could tell from the sound that everything was normal. The flight was going exactly as it should. For the first hour, everyone relaxed and enjoyed the flight. Mrs. Johnson read a magazine. Mr. Peterson worked on his laptop. The Davis couple took pictures out the windows and talked about their vacation plans. Sarah read a book, but she was also listening to the airplane. Her father had taught her that pilots should always listen to their airplanes. "The airplane will tell you if something is wrong," he had said. "You just have to know how to listen." At first, everything sounded perfect. The engine ran smoothly with no unusual vibrations or noise changes. The wind flowing over the wings created a steady whoosh that meant they were flying at the right speed. All the normal airplane sounds were there. But then, about an hour and a half into the flight, Sarah noticed something different. There was a very slight vibration that hadn't been there before. It was so small that the other passengers didn't notice it, but Sarah felt it through her seat. She looked toward the cockpit and saw Captain Torres checking his instruments more carefully than before. His relaxed posture had changed slightly. He was still flying the plane normally, but something had caught his attention. The vibration got a little stronger over the next few minutes. Sarah could hear a slight roughness in the engine that definitely hadn't been there before. She knew from her studies that this could mean several different things. Maybe one of the spark plugs was fouling. Maybe there was a problem with the fuel system. Or maybe something more serious was developing. Sarah didn't want to alarm the other passengers, so she stayed quiet. But she kept listening and watching Captain Torres. She could see him adjusting controls and checking gauges more frequently. Then it happened. There was a loud bang from somewhere in front of the plane, followed by a violent shaking that everyone could feel. The smooth engine sound became rough and uneven like a car with a bad muffler. The plane lurched to the left and several passengers gasped in alarm. "What was that?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her voice filled with worry. Captain Torres's voice came over the intercom, but now it sounded tense and professional instead of relaxed and friendly. "Folks, we're experiencing some mechanical difficulties with the engine. Nothing to be overly concerned about, but as a precaution, I'm going to divert to the nearest airport for an emergency landing. Please make sure your seatbelts are securely fastened and remain calm." But Sarah could hear something in his voice that the other passengers missed. This wasn't a minor problem that could wait for the nearest airport. The engine was in serious trouble, and they were still over the mountains with no good place to land. The engine continued to run rough, making terrible noises that got worse every minute. Sometimes it would smooth out for a few seconds, giving everyone hope, but then the shaking and noise would come back even stronger. Mr. Peterson leaned forward in his seat, trying to see into the cockpit. "How much farther to the airport?" he called out. Captain Torres didn't answer immediately. He was too busy working with his radio and trying to keep the airplane under control. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "We're still about 30 miles from the nearest suitable airport. I'm in contact with air traffic control and they're giving us priority handling." Sarah looked out her window at the terrain below. It was all mountains and thick forest, with no roads or flat areas where a plane could land safely. If the engine quit completely, they would have very few options. The engine noise got worse, sputtering and cutting out for several seconds at a time. Each time it quit, the plane would drop slightly and everyone's stomach would lurch. When the engine caught again, it sounded weaker than before. Mrs. Johnson was starting to panic. Oh God, we're going to crash, aren't we?" "Please stay calm," Captain Torres called back. "I'm a very experienced pilot and I'm going to get us down safely." But Sarah could see that Captain Torres was struggling. Through the gap between the seats, she could see him in the cockpit, hunched over his controls and talking urgently on his radio. Sweat was running down the back of his neck despite the cool air in the cabin. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she heard him say into his microphone. "This is Cessna 478 Charlie declaring an emergency. I have complete engine failure at 8,500 feet, approximately 25 miles southwest of Ridgeline Airport. I'm looking for somewhere to put this airplane down." The response from air traffic control crackled through the radio. "Cessna 478, Charlie, roger your Mayday call. Are you able to make it to Ridgeline Airport?" Sarah heard Captain Torres sigh heavily. "Negative. I don't think we can make it that far. The terrain down here is all mountains and trees. I'm going to need to find a road or a field, but I don't see any good options." That's when everything went from bad to much worse. Sarah watched in horror as Captain Torres suddenly grabbed his chest with his left hand. His face went pale and twisted with pain. He made a small gasping sound and slumped forward against the controls. The airplane immediately started turning to the right as his unconscious body pushed against the control wheel. Without someone flying it, the plane would spiral into the mountains within just a few minutes. The other passengers still hadn't realized what was happening. They were all looking out their windows or sitting with their eyes closed, praying. None of them could see into the cockpit from where they were sitting. Sarah had a choice to make, and she had to make it right now. She could scream and tell everyone that the pilot was unconscious. She could panic like everyone would expect an 11-year-old girl to do. She could wait for one of the adults to figure out what was happening and try to help, or she could use everything her father had taught her and everything she had learned from 2 years of secret studying. Sarah chose to act. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "I'll be right back," she said to Mrs. Johnson, trying to keep her voice calm and normal. She walked quickly to the front of the cabin. When she got close enough to see into the cockpit clearly, she confirmed what she had feared. Captain Torres was slumped over the controls, unconscious. His breathing was shallow but steady. He was having some kind of medical emergency, probably a heart attack brought on by the stress of the engine failure. The airplane was now in a steep right turn, losing altitude quickly. Without immediate action, they would spiral into the ground in less than 2 minutes. Sarah squeezed into the tiny cockpit and carefully moved Captain Torres back in his seat. She had to push his hand away from the control wheel to get access to the flight controls. The first thing she did was level the wings by turning the control wheel to the left. The airplane immediately stopped the steep turn and began flying straight again. Then she pulled back gently on the controls to stop the rapid descent. The airplane responded just like her flight simulator, but everything felt heavier and more real. She could feel the wind trying to push the plane around, and she had to make constant small adjustments to keep it flying smoothly. Now she had to get help. Sarah picked up the microphone that was clipped to the instrument panel. She had listened to hundreds of hours of real air traffic control recordings online, so she knew how pilots were supposed to talk on the radio. She pressed the transmit button and spoke as clearly as she could. Denver Center. This is Cessna 478, Charlie. I have an emergency situation. The response came back immediately. Cessna 478, Charlie, Denver Center, go ahead with your emergency. Sarah took a deep breath. Denver Center, the pilot of this aircraft is unconscious. I am a passenger, and I need immediate assistance. There was a long pause before the controller responded, and when he did, his voice was filled with confusion and disbelief. Cessna 478, Charlie, please repeat your last transmission. Did you say the pilot is unconscious? That's correct, Sarah said, keeping her voice as steady as possible. Captain Torres had some kind of medical emergency and lost consciousness. I am now flying the airplane, but I need someone to help me. Another pause, then. Cessna 478, Charlie, who is speaking? What is your aviation experience? My name is Sarah Chen. I am 11 years old. I don't have a pilot's license, but I have been studying aviation and practicing on flight simulators for 2 years. By now, the other passengers had noticed that something unusual was happening. Mrs. Johnson had turned around and seen that Sarah was no longer in her seat. Mr. Peterson had heard her talking on the radio. What's going on? Mr. Davis called out. Where's the pilot? Sarah didn't take her eyes off the instruments, but she called back to them. Captain Torres is unconscious. I'm flying the airplane right now. Please stay in your seats and let me concentrate, Mrs. Johnson screamed. What, you can't fly an airplane? You're just a child. I can do this, Sarah said firmly. But I need everyone to stay calm and let me work. A new voice came on the radio, calmer and more professional than the first controller. Sarah, this is Tom Bradley. I'm a flight instructor, and I'm here to help you. You're doing a great job so far. Can you tell me what you see on the instrument panel in front of you? Sarah quickly scanned the instruments, just like she had practiced hundreds of times on her simulator. The altimeter shows 7,200 feet. The airspeed indicator shows 95 knots. The attitude indicator shows we're flying level. The heading indicator shows 90 degrees. That's excellent, Sarah. You're giving me exactly the information I need. Now the first thing we need to do is make sure you're flying at the best airspeed for gliding. I want you to gently push the nose down until the airspeed shows 68 knots. Sarah pushed forward on the control wheel until the airspeed needle pointed to 68 knots. Immediately, she could feel the airplane flying more smoothly and efficiently. Perfect, Tom said. Now you're flying at the best glide speed. That will give you the maximum distance for every foot of altitude you have. How much altitude are you losing per minute? Sarah watched the altimeter for a full minute. About 500 feet per minute. That's normal for a Cessna 172 with no engine power. Sarah, I need to ask you something important. How much do you really know about flying? I need to understand what you're capable of. Sarah thought about her answer carefully. She knew this was a critical moment. If she oversold her abilities, Tom might give her instructions that were too advanced. If she undersold them, he might not give her the information she needed to land safely. My father was a pilot before he died, she said. He taught me the basics about how airplanes work and how to read the instruments. Since then, I've been studying aviation books and websites every day. I've practiced emergency procedures on realistic flight simulators for hundreds of hours. I know I'm just a kid, but I understand how airplanes work. Sarah, what was your father's name? David Chen. He flew for Rocky Mountain Aviation. There was a pause, then Tom's voice came back with a different tone. I knew your father. He was an excellent pilot and a good man. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you, Sarah said quietly. Sarah, if you're half the pilot your father was, we're going to get through this just fine. Now I'm looking at the radar and I can see your position. There's a small airport called Mountain View Airport about 15 miles ahead of you. I think you can make it there. By now, all the passengers knew what was happening. Mr. Peterson had moved forward to see if he could help with Captain Torres. Mrs. Davis was crying quietly. Mrs. Johnson was still in shock. staring at the small girl who was flying their airplane. But something had changed in the cabin. The initial panic was being replaced by a different feeling. They were all starting to realize that this 11-year-old girl might actually know what she was doing. "Sarah," Tom continued, "I want you to turn to a heading of 095 degrees. That will take you directly toward the airport." Sarah turned the control wheel slightly to the right and watched the heading indicator until it showed 095 degrees. The airplane turned smoothly toward the airport. "Good. Now, while we're heading there, I want to teach you about the approach and landing. Have you ever practiced landings on your flight simulator?" "Yes, hundreds of times." "But I know real flying is different from the simulator." "You're right, but the basic principles are the same. The most important thing is to maintain the correct airspeed all the way to the ground. Too fast and you'll float down the runway and might run out of space. Too slow and the airplane will stall and drop like a rock." As they flew toward Mountain View Airport, Tom walked Sarah through every step of the approach and landing procedure. He explained how to use the flaps to slow down, how to judge the correct glide path, and how to flare for touchdown. Sarah listened carefully to every word, asking questions when she didn't understand something. Her father had always told her that the best pilots were the ones who asked the most questions. "I can see the airport," Sarah said as a small runway appeared in the distance. "Outstanding. Sarah, I want you to fly directly over the airport at your current altitude so we can take a look at the runway and the wind conditions." As they flew over Mountain View Airport, Sarah could see fire trucks and ambulances lined up beside the runway. Word of the emergency had spread, and everyone was prepared to help. "The windsock shows the wind is coming from the west at about 10 knots, Tom said. "You'll be landing on runway 09, which means you'll be landing into the wind." "That's good. It will help you slow down." Sarah flew past the airport and then began a wide left turn to line up with the runway. This was the most difficult part of the whole flight. She had to judge her altitude, speed, and distance perfectly to make it to the runway. "You're doing great, Sarah. Start your descent now. I want you to aim for the numbers at the beginning of the runway. But don't worry if you're not perfect. The runway is 4,000 feet long, so you have plenty of room." Sarah began a gentle descent toward the runway. She could see the big white numbers 09 painted on the dark asphalt. Fire trucks were positioned along both sides of the runway, ready to respond if anything went wrong. 2 miles out, Tom said. "Lower your flaps to the first setting. There should be a lever on the panel labeled flaps." Sarah found the flap lever and moved it to the first position. Immediately she felt the airplane slow down and the nose pitch up slightly. She had to push forward on the controls to maintain her descent path. "Perfect. How does it feel?" "Different from the simulator, but I think I can do this." "I know you can. 1 mile out now. Lower the flaps to the second setting." Sarah moved the flap lever again. The airplane slowed down more and became more stable in its descent. She could see individual people on the ground now, all watching their approach. 1/2 mile out. "You're looking good, Sarah. Just concentrate on hitting your airspeed and aiming for the numbers." This was it. Sarah could see the runway rushing toward them. She made small adjustments with the controls, trying to keep the airplane lined up with the center line and descending at the right angle. 1/4 mile. Start thinking about your flare. When you get close to the ground, you'll need to pull back gently on the controls to level off just above the runway. The ground was coming up fast now. Sarah could see the runway markings clearly. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her hands were steady on the controls. "You're almost there, Sarah. Start your flare now. Pull back gently. Gently." Sarah pulled back on the control wheel, raising the nose of the airplane. The descent slowed, and for a moment they were flying just a few feet above the runway. "Hold it off. Hold it off. Let it settle." The main wheels touched the runway with a gentle bump. Sarah held the nose up until it settled down on its own. They were on the ground and rolling straight down the center line. "Brakes, Sarah. Push on the top of the rudder pedals to slow down." Sarah pushed on the brake pedals, and the airplane slowed quickly. Within a few hundred feet, they had rolled to a complete stop on the runway. For a moment, there was complete silence in the cockpit. Then Tom Bradley's voice crackled over the radio. "Cessna 478. Charlie, welcome to Mountain View Airport. That was one of the finest emergency landings I have ever witnessed." The cabin erupted in cheers. Mrs. Johnson was crying and laughing at the same time. Mr. Peterson was clapping. The Davis couple were hugging each other and shouting, "She did it! She did it!" Within seconds, the airplane was surrounded by fire trucks, ambulances, and airport vehicles. Paramedics rushed to help Captain Torres, who was conscious again and breathing normally. He would make a full recovery from his heart attack. As Sarah climbed down from the airplane, she was surrounded by firefighters, paramedics, airport workers, and reporters who had heard about the emergency on their radio scanners. Everyone wanted to shake her hand and tell her how amazing she was. A reporter pushed through the crowd with a camera and microphone. Sarah, can you tell us how you knew how to fly an airplane?" Sarah thought carefully about her answer. "My dad was a pilot, and he taught me that anyone can learn anything if they really want to. He said flying isn't magic, it's just physics and procedures. If you study hard enough and practice enough, you can do things that other people think are impossible." Tom Bradley arrived at the airport 20 minutes later. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, and when he saw Sarah, he walked straight over and shook her hand formally. "Sarah, I've been flying and teaching flying for over 30 years. I have never seen anyone, adult or child, handle an emergency situation with such skill and composure. Your father would be incredibly proud of you." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "I just did what he taught me to do." More reporters arrived throughout the afternoon. Everyone wanted to interview the 11-year-old girl who had saved 5 lives by landing a plane. The story was picked up by national news networks and went viral on social media. But through all the attention and excitement, Sarah stayed humble and focused on the facts. When reporters asked her if she felt like a hero, she said, "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who was prepared when preparation was needed." When they asked her what advice she had for other children, she said, "Learn things. Study things you're interested in, even if adults tell you you're too young to understand. You never know when that knowledge might be important." Sarah's mother arrived at Mountain View Airport that evening, crying with relief and pride. She had driven straight from Denver as soon as she heard the news. "I had no idea you knew so much about flying," her mother said as they hugged. "I wanted to learn about Dad's world," Sarah explained. "I know flying took him away from us, but it was also what he loved most. I wanted to understand why." 6 months later, Sarah received her student pilot certificate, making her one of the youngest people in Colorado ever to begin flight training. Tom Bradley became her instructor, and they flew together every weekend. Sarah continued to excel in her studies, both in school and in aviation. She joined the Civil Air Patrol, volunteered at air shows, and gave speeches about aviation safety and emergency preparedness. The FAA used her story in their training materials to show how important it is for everyone on an airplane to understand basic emergency procedures. Aviation magazines wrote articles about her, calling her landing a textbook example of airmanship under pressure. But the recognition that meant the most to Sarah came from other pilots. Wherever she went in the aviation community, experienced pilots treated her with respect and admiration. They didn't see her as just a kid who got lucky. They saw her as a fellow aviator who had proven herself when it mattered most.